So, we're in our series heading up to and around Christmas. Incredible! You can see what we've done there, can't you? As I said last week, the Bible doesn't mention an inn, but so what? Why spoil a good story, as hopefully you'll find out on the carol service night. But I want to dive straight in. Again, last week we did some of the story of Mary from Luke's gospel. This is jumping in on Matthew's gospel, a very famous story, but you can follow along with me on the screens or in your own Bible. Matthew chapter 1 from verse 18. Excuse me. Now the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together, she was found to be pregnant from the Holy Spirit. Her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and unwilling to expose her to public disgrace, planned to divorce her quietly. But just when he had resolved to do this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." All this took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. "Look, the virgin shall become pregnant and give birth to a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God with us." When Joseph awoke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took her as his wife, but had no marital relations with her until she had given birth to a son. And he named him Jesus. So, today's little talk is called Inn-ruption. Now, one of the great things about getting ready for sermons like this is I get to learn a new word. Because here is a word called Inn-ruption. Now it's a variant of a more common word that you might know called irruption. I can't speak. Irruption, which both mean the same thing. They are both the opposite of an eruption. So you think of a volcano erupting, all that kind of idea of a violent kind of shooting out, something erupting. Someone can erupt with anger, or a volcano erupts. It's a turbulent sort of sense of whooshing out like that. Well, Inn-ruption is the opposite of that, or irruption. It's the opposite. It's a violent, turbulent in-breaking, or interruption, or incoming. You're getting the plan so far. Now you're getting the gist, aren't you? Every time I say an in word, we're going to add an N, just because it's fun. It's a violent in-breaking. It's a violent interruption, an in-rushing, and a breaking in to our normal goings on. And I think a brilliant example of this is in the story of Joseph, the father of Jesus. Now, we get some very scant details about Joseph and who he was and where he was from and this kind of details of his life. We don't really get a lot of what you might call biographical information, and it's just another reminder that the gospel writers, even though we think of gospels as being ancient biographies, but ancient biographies didn't have the same concerns as modern biographies. In a modern biography, you'd be all about the details, like, well, when were they born, where were they born, how old were they, what was the date, who was their mum and dad, and who was their postman, and what happened next, and where did they go to school, and these are the sort of details that we fixate on in the modern kind of documentary, sort of post-enlightenment kind of age. But the gospel writers, they're not concerned with that. They're concerned to convey a spiritual truth, and they just pick out the details that serve that spiritual truth, which is really annoying for us, because I'd really love to know some of this stuff. I want to know whether Joseph had a big beard or, I just want to know whether he had a big beard, basically. I think that's probably it, but... He did? Oh, good. Well, we can go home then. Excellent. Beard. Probably had a bald head, glasses. Good-looking man. Check shirt. Oh, Joseph loved a check shirt. These are the details we need, people. Someone go off and be an archaeologist and find this stuff. We need to know. Anyway, I'm straying from the point. So what do we know about Joseph. Well, we know he was a builder, okay? And Jesus learned how to be a builder. So you probably think Jesus is a carpenter, Joseph is a carpenter. Actually, the Greek word tekton means a kind of general builder. So he certainly would involve carpentry, but essentially a builder. And there was lots of work at that time in a little, quite a big town, about 3.5 miles away from Nazareth, a place called Sepphoris. And Sepphoris, I won't go into the history of it all, but this was like the sort of regional administrative centre. It was a real growing place. It had been like smashed, destroyed, burned by fire a few years before. So a lot of rebuilding work happening. So you can start to maybe infer some of these details. Maybe, Joseph, if he's from Bethlehem, but he comes to Nazareth because it's near to Sepphoris, he can live nearby. And there's a lot of work there. So you can start to maybe piece together some of these biographical details. It's all speculative, of course, but I still find it quite fascinating. And there's also a tradition that Joseph was quite a lot older than Mary. There's absolutely nothing in the Bible that suggests that. Where that I think that comes from is a sort of traditional doctrine in the Catholic Church, particularly of the perpetual virginity of Mary. Now again, nothing in the Bible would really suggest that. In fact, it would suggest sort of the opposite, bearing in mind what we just read. However, this idea of perpetual virginity, later on it talks about Jesus' brothers and sisters. So some early church father went, so maybe these were step-brothers and sisters from Joseph's previous marriage. Again, absolutely no suggestion that that's what's in the text. So the idea that he's older, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but no suggestion that he was, and that their marriage then continued and Jesus had brothers and sisters in the normal way. We don't know, we just don't know these details. We know that he was around until Jesus was 12, because we get that story of Jesus being 12 in the temple, and Joseph's featured in that story, just briefly. And then after that, nothing. He seems to have disappeared from our narrative, and we presume that he's died, because later on, as I said in the scriptures, we read of Jesus' mother's brothers and sisters. They're mentioned, but not his father, interestingly enough. And also when Jesus is on the cross, if you remember in John's gospel, he looks down at John and he says, will you look after, he basically commits his mother, Mary, into John's care to look after her, because obviously Jesus isn't expecting to be around. So again, that would be odd if Jesus' father, Joseph, was still alive. He would be looking after Mary. But so it seems that he died. So we don't really know much about this character of Joseph, but what we can infer of the character and the influence of Joseph, even though it's only suggested by these few short anecdotes, I want to suggest to you that he is an inspirational figure. Inspirational. Joseph, to me, is an inspirational figure. Why? And it really ties up nicely with everything we've been talking about today, with what Amanda shared, and some of the themes that have come through in the worship as well. I think Joseph is a really inspirational figure. Because, as I shared with you last week, the very strong implication is that Mary is invited into God's plan. At the end of the little section where Gabriel is saying, look, this is what's going to happen, Mary gets to say to Gabriel, let it be to me as you have said. That's her way of saying yes. She's saying, yes, let my body, let my life be used for God's purposes in this way. She gets to make a decision. The difference with Joseph, he doesn't get to make a decision. He wasn't asked. When Joseph finds out about this situation, it's just happening. She's pregnant. No one came to Joseph and said, would it be okay if this happened to Mary? It just happened. She is pregnant. He was going along. He had his plans. He was betrothed to this young lady, and again, we can fill in some of the details. We can use our imagination. They were betrothed, You would expect when a young couple got betrothed, even in those days with arranged marriage and that sort of thing, there would be affection. There would be relationship. There would certainly be respect. He was probably looking forward to marriage and a life together and a home, after a busy day on the building site, coming back to a lovely home together, to having a certain life in the community, a certain reputation in the community. This is Joseph in those months before all this happens. And then the awful day comes, the awful news is broken to him. Joseph, she's pregnant. And you know, it's not your baby, is it? So what conclusions are you going to draw? What conclusions is everyone going to draw? What conclusions is Joseph going to draw? I think this is why Joseph is inspirational. I think this is what makes him so relatable as a character. Relatable to me, relatable to us, I think. You know, things are going along. Life is going along a certain way. You know what it's like. Life's going along a certain way. La, 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 la. And then bang, everything changes. Life throws a curveball at you or drops a bombshell on you. You know, you get that call. You have that conversation. You visit the doctor. Something happens. You get that message from work. And this bombshell is dropped on you. You're going along and bang. Suddenly, life is not the same way it was yesterday or even this morning. There is an irruption. There is an interruption. There is a breaking in. You know, you're going along and suddenly, bang, this new dimension, this new reality just breaks into your life. Didn't ask, didn't say please, didn't knock politely, just bang. Deal with this now. This is happening now. It can be an inconvenience at best, and at worst, it's an absolute awful life wound. And now we just need to decide what we're going to do about that, how we're going to react to that. And I think so much of this is down to our formation. We've spent a lot of this year talking about formation and discipleship and what we're doing day by day to grow our lives, to nourish our lives in the Holy Spirit and in our lives of following Jesus. A lot of it is to do with formation, and it's formation that forms integrity or integrity. Come on, this is my last one. I promise there won't be many more. Because Joseph has been formed in all these years. You know, God didn't make a mistake when he came to this couple. He knew the kind of person that Joseph had been. But like all the rest of us, I suggest to you, Joseph wasn't just born being a really great guy. It was the habits that form us day by day, the things we do, the practices that we have. And Joseph had been shaped as a righteous man. He wanted to do the right thing, but he'd also been formed as a kind man, as a good man. His instinct is to do the right thing, you know. Obviously, he's got to kind of respond to this in the correct way, given the rules and the kind of traditions of his society. He wants to divorce her. He's going to end this now. It's like, okay, this isn't right that we carry on like this, but we're going to have a divorce. But he wants to do it quietly. Now, if you read the Old Testament, you get some idea of some of the punishments that could be meted out onto a young woman who was found to be pregnant out of wedlock, up to and including killing her, murdering her, stoning her to death. Joseph doesn't want that for her. He wants to do the right thing, but he also wants to do the kind thing. He wants to do this quietly. He wants to preserve as much of her reputation and her opportunity for some sort of decent future life as he possibly can. And we've talked about this a lot this year, but it's so important to focus in again and again. What is forming us? What is forming you day by day? Because what is forming us, what is shaping the kind of person we are, doesn't it? You know this experience? It comes out in moments like this. Who's ever had an experience like that where life drops one of these awful bombshells on you, and it's in that moment you find out who you really are? Does everything just blow out? Does everything fall apart? Or have you got some strength? Have you got some spiritual, what's the word? Guts. Strength is a good word, yeah. Some guts, some core, some center, some foundation, which you will actually be able to lean upon and rest into and lean into through this storm, through this crisis. It's in those moments when you find out who you really are, who I found out who I really am. And that's why it's so important to be doing the work day by day. It's like we said before, if you want to suddenly run a London marathon, if I wanted to suddenly run the London Marathon, I would die. It would be horrible. I'd get about 200 yards and my wife would be scraping me up and, putting me in the back of a car. So, but if we need to train, we need to test day by day, build up the muscles, build up the strengths, build up the reserves. And then when the time of testing comes, we're ready. And then in the story of Joseph, as often happens in our own stories, in perhaps less expected or unexpected ways, something remarkable happens. In Joseph's story, it turns out that this crisis, this thing that's happened, this thing that's erupted into his life and just turned everything upside down, it actually seems to be part of some bigger plan that God has. And then Joseph still does have a decision. He could still surrender to the bitterness and the disappointment. It's not my plan. I didn't choose this. Not my choice, God. Yeah, all right, it's part of your plan, but that's your plan, your problem. Why should I put up with this? Why should I put up with the muttering and the looks and the whispers and the stares? Not my plan. He could do that. He could surrender to the bitterness. He could still surrender to the disappointment. But what he chooses to do, and what we can always choose to do as well, is to press on forward into that really awkward, difficult, liminal kind of space, that space of risk, that space of uncertainty, that space of faith, that awkward, dodgy, wobbly, I don't know what's happening, but I'm kind of hanging on with my fingernails kind of space, which, spoiler alert, is the space where God seems to do what God seems to do. I wish it was different. I wish it could all be safe and easy and straightforward and predictable, but God seems to choose exactly those sorts of spaces to do the amazing things that God does. And so Joseph responds with faith. He's open to see and to hear what God is doing. Because who's ever had a weird dream? And you could very easily wake up and go, that was some strong cheese. Mustn't have hot chocolate before bed. Too much sugar. We're very good at talking ourselves out of dreams and visions, aren't we? Very easy in the cold light of day to say, oh yeah, perhaps not. Very easy to shut down that insistent, still small voice if our hearts aren't open. But Joseph's heart is open. I want to be really clear here. Not all the harsh interruptions and irruptions in our lives, in your lives, have been the result of what God wanted. They're not all and always the result of something wonderful that God is planning. No, not at all. They may not even be his will. Pain and suffering often, usually perhaps, come from the brokenness of this creation that we know all about. Very often, pain and suffering come from sin. They come from our sin or the sin of others that we are unfortunately caught up in. So not every horrible interruption into your life is going to be because God is doing something wonderful. But like Joseph in this story, we still have that choice. We can choose how to respond. We can surrender to the bitterness and the disappointment. Or we can lean into the arms of God. We can dive deeper, walk deeper into the arms of the God who is with us. Emmanuel, we've had it a couple of times today already. Emmanuel, God with us. I want to kind of, as I move towards some sort of ending, I want to share with you some verses from the book of Romans. And these are often some of the least helpful words. And you'll know the bit I'm talking about if you've ever had this kind of lobbed at you as, oh, well, I'm going to go to Romans 8:28. But listen, a bit of context about this, these words from Paul. And the preceding couple of verses really help in setting the scene for what is often a little, it's the bit, God works all things for good for those who love Christ Jesus and are called according to his purpose. Oh yeah, who's ever had that on a little card when life's a burning ruin around them? However, get the context, and these are really, really important verses. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. That's what Paul's talking about. For we do not know how to pray as we ought, but that very Spirit intercedes with groanings too deep for words. Who's ever had a good deep groan that's beyond words? And God, who searches hearts, knows what's in the mind of the Spirit. Because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. The Spirit is interceding for the saints according to the will of God. We know that all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. And I think other ancient authorities, and the Greek itself offers itself to be translated slightly differently. And I think for our purposes, it's more helpful to translate it maybe one of these ways. God makes all things work together, or in all things, God works for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. That's not saying that all things are good. It's saying that in all things, the good, the bad, and the ugly, God can work. God can work. It's not every cloud has a silver lining, which is sometimes how that verse is used. It's not saying that at all. It's saying God can work through all things, even the painful things, even the things of suffering and difficulty and challenge. I would maybe say especially, I'm losing my voice, especially those things. How does God do that? Well, two really clear things that come through this verse. First of all, lean into that love. Those who love God, lean into the love of God. It's about staying close to him. It's not pushing him away. It's the most tempting thing in the world when you're walking through the valley of shadow to say, right, forget you, God. I thought you were supposed to be my fairy godfather who just, made my life really smooth and easy and safe and straightforward. To people who think that, I would say, read the Bible. They all die. It's like, spoiler alert. No. The Bible is full of suffering. The Bible is a real book. The Bible is an incredibly human book. No, God says, when you walk through the valley of shadow, I'll be with you. My rod and my staff, they'll comfort you. Psalm 23. Stay close. Don't push him away. Don't doubt his love. We only love him because he first loved us, it says in 1 John. And continue to be formed by his godly love. We talk a lot about love here, I'm so pleased to say. It's love which shapes us. Don't give way to the bitterness. Don't give way to that cry for revenge or payback or whatever it might be. No, allow yourself to still be formed by godly love. And the second thing, in the second part here, you are called according to his purpose. God is still God, and you are still you. You are the person he made you to be. You still have a kingdom role. You still have a destiny. You are still a child of God. You still have spiritual gifts and purpose. And I guarantee you will have a testimony from this of what God has done, can do, and is doing in your life. He is a saving God. He is a God of resurrection. That's what we learn in the story of Jesus. He is a God of life out of death, life beyond death. Death is not the end. If you haven't yet got that message in all your experiences and contact with Christianity, then please let me just give you that message again. It's all about an empty tomb. Life beyond death, not life that avoids death and suffering and hardship, but life that exists on the other side of it. It's about new life. It's about new creation. He has the capacity, and I'm just going to ask the band to come and start getting plugged in as we move towards an end, and I'll hand back to Richard in just a second to guide our last few moments. But remember that God has the capacity to bring the light of hope and the light of healing even in the darkest situation. And this is what is going to be decisive. This is what is going to be decisive when we face these moments of in-ruption, these turbulent, violent in-breakings into our lives. This will decide whether they will be destructive or whether they can actually be a doorway into new creation, into something new and wonderful and healing that God can create even out of the darkest and most difficult and challenging of circumstances. This is the power of resurrection that is at work, and as Paul says, is at work in your life too. Whether this thing will reveal something beautiful and transformative that God longs to do in the world and longs to do in your life. This season is all about this unexpected miracle happening in the most unlikely of circumstances. So let's take hold of that in our lives and for our families and our communities this Christmas time.